The good news is a lot of what went wrong for the Chicago Bears against the Minnesota Vikings is fixable. The bad news is there's a lot to fix.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1, and you can follow the podcast at Locked On Bears on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and the Locked On Bears YouTube channel, where you can keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. On the show today, I want to go through what we learned going back through this Bears loss to the Minnesota Vikings. We'll start with Caleb Williams, who definitely missed some throws that they absolutely needed to hit, but we got a little bit of a better sense of why, and also some of the things Ben Johnson and the rest of the offense could have done better to make that job a little bit easier. Not to absolve Caleb Williams from blame, but just to say that, hey, more than just him contributed to the problems that we saw on offense there. We'll go through some of those other problems on offense and some of those other problems on defense, but it's not all bad here. This is not just like, here's all the things that went bad, but also there were a couple names that popped out at me as like guys who played surprisingly well that maybe we didn't notice immediately on the TV copy because of so much that was going wrong late in that game, kind of gets a little bit overshadowed. But when you go back through and rewatch Caleb Williams' throws, I think a couple of things stand out. One, he definitely missed some passes that you need your quarterback to hit. Not necessarily all easy gimme passes, but passes that a number one overall pick at the position in his second year with competent coaching and competent weapons should be able to hit at this point. There's no denying or getting around that. Now, that being said, it was about a handful of plays, and over the course of the game, quarterbacks are going to miss a few of those. I mean, every quarterback has at least one throw a game that they'd like back that they just didn't throw the way they wanted to or miss and have an incompletion that's on the quarterback's fault. Caleb obviously had more than one or two throws in this game, but it's not as though, he had 15 bad balls and just looked like not an NFL caliber passer. Like on those plays, it's like, woof, that was not the Caleb you needed Caleb to be. But to me, some of the common themes and denominators in those misses in particular was the footwork still being a little bit messy and kind of being all over the place. And we'll dive into that a little bit more in a second here. But then also there was a certain rushed aspect of it where I think Caleb Williams was often doing a really good job of intentionally not staring down receivers and trying to look off defenders. And then at the last minute, he turns and throws to the receiver, and that's when he rushes it, right? Where I think especially the key example of this is that potential touchdown pass to DJ Moore up the left sideline where it was going to land just short of the end zone there. That's a play where he knew, you can tell, he knew right away that, or pretty quickly, that DJ Moore was where he was going to want to go with that ball. And in order to create that space and kind of sell it, he snaps it. Remember the replay, Olamide Zaccheaus is in the slot, and Zaccheaus just goes straight into the flat, right towards the sideline, right around the line of scrimmage. And then DJ Moore from that same side of the field just goes vertical, and Caleb snaps and then immediately looks over to Zaccheaus and is kind of staring down Zaccheaus to try and bait that outside cornerback up and create the space then behind him deep for DJ Moore. And you'll see it he's staring at Zaccheaus into the last possible second, then flips his eyes to DJ Moore and fires the ball right away. And it just felt like he knew that was going to be open, and that it was open, and he tried to get rid of it and tried to get the ball there, and it was just a little bit too fast, and it sailed on him. And we saw that same thing happen a few different times on plays where, he's in he's intentionally looking somewhere else, then snaps his head to where he's obviously going to go with the ball, and then just rushes the throw a little bit, and it sails on him. Too many of these passes are going high because he's not taking his time and really driving the ball down. A lot of times when passes go high, and this is not universally the case, but generally speaking, it's about the follow through and the transfer of weight from the back foot to the front foot. Like that's where you get sort of the velocity and like the downward trajectory of like where you're letting go of the ball. When you're sailing it, it's because the ball's coming out a half second too early and you haven't gotten as much of that like force going forward to the downward motion of the ball, and that's where it's sailing. And so you combine that with too many times when his front foot is not facing directionally where he's trying to go with the ball. I think also because he's hurrying it and rushing it, like it all kind of leans together. Like the front foot is more towards the player he was disguising his look at. And then when he tries to step in to throw to the player he meant to throw to, he doesn't step enough. Like it's a quick step because he's trying to hurry and get through it. So like to me, a lot of that suggests two things. One, this is first game quarterback running the offense for the first time, with some new receivers and stuff. Where like, I don't want to call it like jitters because he's a pro. Like it's not an excuse to say like, oh, he just had some jitters like he's a child. But like I think there's some of that of like maybe trying to get ahead of himself a little bit there. That I think in theory with more time can and should slow down a little bit because it's not like a processing thing. It's not a brain thing where the thinking needs to get faster. Like the game doesn't need to slow down for him. He just needs to like just take a deep breath and just like let it come to him there and don't worry about being so quick. Like there was plenty of time to take an extra half second or quarter of a second to step into that throw the way he needed to, and the ball still would have gotten to DJ Moore on time, or the slant routes over the middle of the field. Like there's time. But the other aspect of it is like against Brian Flores' defense, you don't feel like there's time. Like I think it's a combination of week one first offense and then also Brian Flores. You think he's going to blitz you, and he doesn't really blitz you much at all in the first half, so you get into this rhythm. And then the second half, he really starts blitzing you overboard, and now you're rushed, now you're throwing, now you're not stepping into it. And like all of that to me is, I'm not going to give Caleb Williams excuses because we want and need and should hold a second-year quarterback, number one overall pick, to a higher standard than that. Like this is not to say like, hey, it's fine, don't worry about it because of these excuses. More so, those feel like things that are correctable and not necessarily going to be chronic issues that continue to affect him all season long. Like when they play a Detroit Lions defense next week that should run a little bit more man coverage, maybe not be quite as aggressive, I think we should be able to expect a lot of improvement. And if we don't, there's going to be some really big issues there. And then, Ben Johnson talked on Tuesday about how he felt like he could have done more like in the first half, especially as things started winding after the first incomplete pass and things kind of got off the rails a little bit. He felt like he was overly cautious about Brian Flores blitzing when he wasn't blitzing very much, and then had trouble kind of adapting back to that when Flores started blitzing more. And so I think there's some things that also the offensive play calling and coaching staff could have also done a little bit differently. Not that that was the problem or that's an excuse for Caleb, just that, hey, other guys have opportunities to get better too. And then the offensive line also needs to get better. A lot of unblocked pressure up the middle, and Caleb did a good job of delivering some nice balls in spite of the offensive line very much not feeling fixed in this game. He didn't take nearly as many sacks as he did in the past, and generally I think was quick going through his progressions and reads. So it doesn't feel like the kind of stuff that like is chronic issues that just haven't gotten better from last year. It felt a little bit more acute to this game, this week, this defensive coordinator, this situation that in theory should be able to improve. It doesn't mean everything's going to be perfectly fixed 1 week later against the Lions, but it feels like stuff that over time, as he gets more experience in the offense and running this in regular season game situations, I think you can have some optimism that things will continue to improve there. So that's kind of the Caleb story. But I think there's some bigger picture things we learned about this Bears offense, including a really specific plan for the running game, some designated roles for the receivers, and what the heck's going on with this Bears offensive line. We'll explore the offense before we turn our attention to the defense next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel is making sure you're ready for every kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Because right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if that $5 bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets in addition to the winnings of your $5 bet that you can use all across the app. So if you want to bet on Bears-Lions this Sunday, the line's already moved. The line has already moved from yesterday to today. Bears plus 5.5 underdog on the road in Detroit. Money line is Bears plus 205 if you want to bet them straight up. And the over-under is still set at 47.5 total points in this game. A $5 bet on those or any of your other favorite sports, and you get it right, boom, $300 in bonus bets. So are you ready to play? Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. Locked On Bears is also brought to you by Supply House. When the opening whistle blows on a new repair, get your crew moving with Supply House. Order today and see parts on your doorstep tomorrow. Over 280,000 plumbing, HVAC, and electrical items from the most trusted brands in the business. Their real-time inventory and honest lead times keep you from punting projects, while industry-leading customer service always has your blind side covered. If you need parts for a project fast, Supply House has next-day delivery. Talk about a game changer. And their parts finder tools and 3D schematics can save you hours on jobs where every detail matters. Join the free Trademaster program today and score serious perks like priority shipping, lower prices, and a dedicated support line. Visit supplyhouse.com to sign up for free and use our promo code SHNFL5 for 5% off your first order. That's supplyhouse.com, promo code SHNFL5. Supply House, real people, real service. This Bears offensive line was just as much of a problem going back through on tape than it was watching live. Perhaps even arguably more of a problem. I came away with a greater appreciation of Caleb Williams's escapability, despite what we thought was supposed to be a better group up front. There was unblocked pressure up the middle multiple times where, give Brian Flores credit, he's good at designing those simulated pressures is what they call them, where it looks like it's going to be a blitz. And so everyone is, and even like the first step, everyone steps like they're going to blitz, and then some guys back off, and it ends up only being a 4-man rush. But because it looked like they were coming for that first step, the whole offensive line reacts to the blitz, and then as some people are backing up, other guys are coming in, and you're not sure who's coming and who's going. And there were a few different times when Drew Dahlman struggled to pick that up. And there were plenty of times when Jonah Jackson, even in one-on-one blocks, struggled to consistently stay in front of guys. I certainly don't want to pin it all on those two, because going back through, I was a little bit less impressed with Braxton Jones than I thought having watched it live. It didn't feel like there was a ton of pressure coming in from the left side. And I will say, oftentimes it felt like with Jones, it was a lot more of like a bull rush condenses and collapses the pocket a little bit, as opposed to guy makes one move and just whips Braxton Jones off the line of scrimmage, right? There's different kinds of losing in pass protection. There's the instant, oh, that guy just stepped around you, and now your offensive lineman is turning and facing the quarterback going, uh-oh, I can't block him anymore, versus 2 or 3 seconds into the play, the guy has driven you back, and now the quarterback has to move because you've collapsed some space, but the offensive lineman is still in between the defensive lineman and the quarterback. They just sort of collapse the pocket a little bit. That's something Ben Johnson talked about in the lead up to the Vikings game with Braxton Jones specifically. He said, every offensive lineman is going to get beat, but if you're going to get beat, then get beat slowly so that the quarterback has as much time as possible before you're actually beat in that. And I thought that categorized Braxton Jones's game well in this one, where it was you're still getting beat, so you're not here to say oh, actually it wasn't a problem. Because Braxton Jones gave up 6 pressures, 2 hits and 4 hurries. Technically, that was the most of any Bears offensive lineman, but Jonah Jackson had 5, Drew Dahlman had 4, Joe Thuney quietly had 4. But I think Braxton Jones and Joe Thuney's losses were a lot slower than Dahlman's and Jonah Jackson's. And I also think particularly from the tackle position, Braxton Jones collapsing the left side of the pocket is a little bit less disruptive than the center and right guard top of the pocket being brought down right in the quarterback's face. Like, Caleb was pretty good at feeling a little bit of the collapsing on the blind side and kind of stepping to the right and then stepping around and getting out of the pocket, as opposed to like when a Vikings linebacker is coming right down his throat. There wasn't as much he was able to do, because it's like, oh, this guy is right in front of me. I can't even get the throw off in those types of situations. All of that being said, Darnell Wright was solid, rock solid, really good. He got flagged on a garbage holding penalty that clearly was not the case there, was really solid in pass protection, really good run blocker. Like if Darnell Wright plays like he did in week 1, he's going to get a big contract extension. Like, Pro Bowl, people talk about, is he Pro Bowl? I mean, I don't know. I mean, one game was that a Pro Bowl caliber game? Maybe. I mean, if he does that for 17 games, yeah, that's Pro Bowl caliber right tackle play for sure. In all likelihood, every player has ups and downs, and he's going to have good games and bad games, but generally really impressed by Darnell Wright in this game. And I think this is an area for the rest of the offensive line, and we'll kind of remove Joe Thuney from this conversation because he had a good game. He generally played well. Wasn't lights out, but played well. But like for Braxton Jones, Jonah Jackson, and Drew Dahlman, this is where we need to see Bears offensive line coach Dan Rochar earn his paycheck. Like, we were so underwhelmed by offensive line coach Chris Morgan in the previous regime. We never really saw guys get better. We didn't see a lot of that week-to-week improvement. We didn't see guys settle down and settle in. But I think maybe they can kind of slow some things down for Drew Dahlman and work on picking up stunts and twists. And ultimately, much like Caleb, there will be improvement just by not playing Brian Flores. Like, at the end of the day, Flores is a good defensive coordinator and makes life hard for a lot of opposing offensive lines. And part of why Ben Johnson had such success against Brian Flores in Detroit was how good that Lions offensive line was. I mean, it was one of the best offensive lines in football, and that makes it a lot easier to be able to pick up blitzes when you can trust that all 5 guys are going to hold up. And Jonah Jackson and Jonah Jackson and Drew Dahlman had a lot more trouble with that. I have more faith in Dahlman figuring some things out than Jackson, who we haven't seen Jonah Jackson play well in a while. And that's the one like lingering long-term thing of like, I'm not sure that's going to get better, but we'll see how it goes. And certainly if they can just run the ball more, that will help the offensive line not face such long down and distances where opposing defensive coordinators and opposing pass rushers can just pin their ears back and go. And that's going to be, that requires them to run block better as well. But I was surprised to see Ben Johnson a little bit more, I don't want to say narrowly focused is the right word, but in the running game, the Bears were a heavy zone rushing team. And we heard Ben Johnson talk throughout the preseason and training camp of like, we're still figuring out what kind of run scheme we're going to be and what's going to work best for us. And very clearly, the answer was a lot of inside zone and then some stretch zone off of that too. And I thought this offensive line in this game struggled a little bit with the stretch zone, especially picking that up and passing things off. And it required a lot of cutbacks from Swift. And sometimes he found some room, but wasn't finding a ton of it there. And I'm just curious to see if that's the strategy they continue with all season long, or if they ultimately end up changing that as time goes on. If they do end up changing it, that feels like a negative reflection on Ben Johnson, because this is what happened at the start of last season with DeAndre Swift and Shane Waldron, where the Bears could not run the ball for the first 3 or 4 games, trying to run Shane Waldron's inside zone scheme over and over again. The offensive line was struggling with it. Swift wasn't super confident with it. And about 4 or 5 weeks into the season, they switched to being more of a gap scheme downhill running team, more of that power pulling a guard from the backside. They blocked it better. Swift ran it better. Obviously a very different interior offensive line, 3 new starters. So it's reasonable that Ben Johnson would see those 3 starters and say, yeah, Drew Dahlman's more of a zone blocking center, so he should be better in this scheme. Jonah Jackson had success running this kind of scheme in Detroit with him, so he should be better in the scheme. And then Joe Thuney is kind of universal, can kind of do a little bit of whatever you ask for him. So like in theory, this should be the right run scheme for this offense, at least for the offensive line. But I'm curious to see if they can block it a little bit better, if Swift gets more comfortable in it, or if they end up having to change things just because it's not working the way they envisioned it. And it certainly was Ben Johnson's job to envision it properly and put these guys in a position to be successful. So if that has to change, always give him credit for admitting failure and making a change, but expectation was that there wouldn't be failure, especially in the running game. Like, that's the one thing Ben Johnson was going to be great at, was running the football. We didn't see that in week 1. Doesn't mean it's toast and game over for the rest of the season. They'll never be able to run the ball, but like we got to see some improvement in that, and that starts with the offensive line, but Swift and the scheme certainly play a factor in that as well. Similar conversation on defense, where I think there were a few guys that stood out to me as like, oh, he played better than I would have thought he did. And there were a few guys that like, oh, he was a lot worse than I thought he was just from having watched it on TV. So we'll take a look at some of the good and the bad and what we learned about what Dennis Allen is already doing on defense and what Dennis Allen definitely still has waiting in the chambers, that he can pull out some different wrinkles in the future that we haven't really seen yet in this Bears defense in just one game. Next on Locked On Bears. The Locked On Bears podcast is brought to you by Mazda. Mazda crafts cars for those who do more than simply move. Mazda delivers confidence with every ride, with more IIHS top safety pick awards than anyone else. You know, from footwork to breathwork, athletes sweat all the details, and Mazda brings the same intention to how they craft every model. They can help you make everyday drives feel like anything but every day, from smooth handling to intuitive controls. And with all-wheel drive standard in every crossover SUV, you can drive with confidence through almost any season. So like our players, Mazda sweats every detail, because when you make every move count, impossible becomes irrelevant. Mazda, move and be moved. This Chicago Bears defense did a lot of things really well for so long, and then things fell apart, obviously late in giving up the 3 touchdowns. And I think we got fooled a little bit by some of the stuff we saw right out of the gate. And then I think the dam was slowly breaking until it kind of burst in the fourth quarter, but I don't think we noticed it breaking slowly as much along the way. Like the main thing that jumped out to me there was with the pass rush, where I think coming into the game, we saw sacks on the first 2 or 3 drives of the game. I'm kind of mixing up in my head exactly the order of operations there, but like it was first drive ends with a sack on 3rd and 2 of McCarthy, where he tried to scramble and couldn't get out. Second drive ends on a sack on 3rd and 1, where they got him just short there, so they had to, or 3rd and 4, so they had to punt on that drive, and they got some good pressure on him on the 3rd drive, but he did end up getting a field goal on that drive. But it was like, oh wow, this Bears pass rush is way exceeding expectations and has come alive and is making J.J. McCarthy uncomfortable. And we didn't necessarily, or at least I didn't necessarily realize like how much it pretty well dropped off and fell apart from there. Like J.J. McCarthy was under pressure on 6 of his passes, 6 passing plays in this game. That was 3 sacks, and then one where he was kind of like hit as he was thrown, and 1 scramble. And so he was 1 of 2 passing on the 6 plays he was under pressure. But the rest of the game, clean pockets. Like it was really those first couple of drives was the majority of the pressure on J.J. McCarthy. And I think Dennis Allen did do a good job of, even when they weren't getting actual pressure on McCarthy, still changing the pre-snap looks post-snap and showing a blitz and then not bringing the blitz and making it confusing for the young quarterback. I mean, they only blitzed him 6 times in the game and really didn't do it much in the first half at all. I think the first time they blitzed him was when they got that pick 6. But even then, like the blitz hadn't even gotten home yet. He wasn't under pressure. He just forced it, and Deshaun Wright jumped. He stared down the receiver and just tried to get rid of it quickly, and boom, you're good to go. But the Bears pass rush absolutely does need to be better. Now, that being said, I don't think the Dayo Odeyingbo performance was a mirage necessarily. Like it was a lot of him taking on a backup left tackle quite a bit. I mean, it wasn't exclusively that way, but there was certainly some benefit he had from playing a lot of the sort of the right side of the Bears defense. This isn't just all passing plays, but out of all of his snaps, he had 22 of them on that right edge going up against that left tackle. Like he was able to get a lot of his pressure there, but he was consistently winning. His total pressure snaps or stats from the game was 1 sack, 2 quarterback hurries on 25 pass rush snaps. Like it wasn't like a stuff in the stat sheet kind of performance, but he was consistently like winning. There were a number of plays where he beats the offensive lineman, but J.J. McCarthy gets rid of the ball before he's actually under pressure, but it was still a good pass rush rep by Dayo Odeyingbo. So I came away equally as impressed on the second watch with Odeyingbo as I did on the first watch, despite feeling less impressed by the pass rush on the second watch. And that's because it felt like Montez Sweat, I don't want to say like largely disappeared, but his impact was harder to notice. Like he wasn't winning his pass rushes. Like he was getting a lot of attention from the opposing offensive line. They were sending help to Montez Sweat's side, and he was also playing quite a bit against their right tackle. Is it O'Neal, I think, who's, again, no Pro Bowl player, but one of the more reliable veteran tackles in the league. So there's something to be said about that, but also you're paying Montez Sweat as a top 20 pass rusher in football, and he needs to be able to be better in spite of all the attention he's getting on that edge. I was disappointed by Montez Sweat. It's kind of like the Caleb conversation where it's like, we just can't make excuses for Sweat not being good enough. He just has to be better at the price that they're paying him and everything they've put on his shoulders to be a big difference maker up front. And the same is absolutely true for Grady Jarrett, who also largely kind of disappeared in this game. I thought Gervon Dexter had some nice impact plays and was winning his pass rush throughout, but you didn't see Grady Jarrett really collapsing that pocket much at all. And they let him stick at that 3 technique spot and be the get upfield pass rusher. And it felt like Dexter playing more nose tackle was more disruptive as a pass rusher there. So it just felt to me like your 2 veteran leaders on the defensive line were very underwhelming, and your 2 young up-and-comers who we didn't know what to expect exactly were encouraging. And so I guess there's 2 ways to look at that. One, you could be afraid that Jarrett's washed and never going to get any better, and that Sweat's a total waste, and holy crap, the Bears have invested all this stuff in those guys that are underperforming, and that's a problem. That is one perspective. On the other end, on the other side, you could look at it and say, Sweat and Jarrett are veteran players and have been consistent enough in their careers that they're not going to play that bad every single week. They're just not. They're going to be better. Will they be Pro Bowl better? No, but they're going to be better. And so if you got your young guys playing well and your veteran guys are underachieving, but you trust that they can kind of get back to playing at a higher level, there can be more progress from that pass rush as things go on. And something that we didn't see Dennis Allen do much of in this game that I think we will see more wrinkles of in the future that can also help improve the pass rush. You really didn't see the defensive linemen move around all that much. Montez Sweat never really kicked inside a defensive tackle. Dayo Dengbo didn't kick inside a defensive tackle. Grady Jarrett moved around a little bit here and there, but most of the guys stayed at their position. Sweat and Odengbo played defensive end. Grady Jarrett and Chris Williams played 3 technique defensive tackle. Gervon Dexter rotated between 3 technique and nose tackle, but Dexter didn't kick outside of the edge at all. Billings didn't move around. We didn't see a lot of repositioning guys to try and get your edge rushers matched up with a slower guard on the inside. All the things we talked about, maybe moving guys around and using positional versatility. From a defensive line perspective, they really didn't do that much at all. They also didn't, as a defense, play as much man coverage as I think people might have been expecting. And that's probably more a reflection of missing Jalen Johnson and Kyler Gordon and Josh Blackwell, and at one point also missing Deshaun Wright. But having a bunch of backups out there, they were in man coverage about 35% of the time. J.J. McCarthy had some of his chunk plays in those man coverage plays, but it was, against man coverage, he was 4 of 6 for 65 yards and the pick 6. It's over 10 yards per pass attempt. It sounds bad, but that's actually pretty good. He got some pretty good chunk. He completed 4 passes for 65 yards against the Bears in man coverage. I'm no math major, but that's a little over 15 yards per completion there. The Bears, in a lot of ways, were a little bit better in zone because I think McCarthy had a little bit more trouble reading that, especially because it's easier to disguise that from what Dennis Allen was doing. So that's a little bit more of a natural thing. I will say, I thought Tyreek Stevenson was quietly pretty solid. Didn't get burned in any major way that was punished. It wasn't perfect by any means, but I just thought for all the attention on the injuries at corner, he kind of had a quietly solid game there, holding down his side. Deshaun Wright got a lot more balls thrown his way. Tremaine Edmonds and Noah Sewell got a lot more balls thrown their way. I thought Noah Sewell was particularly bad. Missed 3 or 4 tackles in this game, including against the run, which is his strong suit. He was instinctive against the run and got to the right place, but just couldn't finish against the run, and then got beaten in coverage a few different times. They need TJ Edwards back, and I would strongly consider someone like Ruben Hippolyte trying to play more of those snaps, because Sewell just is what he is at this point. He's slow and he's not very instinctual in coverage. He doesn't look very comfortable moving backwards, but moving forwards, downhill, he's got the Nick Kwiatkowski impression really, really all together, put together well. And then something we didn't talk about much yesterday, but Jonathan Owens was your number 3 safety in this defense. They went to that dime package 8 or 10 times and brought him in as a third safety. So, like, essentially you would have Jonathan Owens and Kevin Byard deep, and then Brisker up in the box kind of roaming around for a 3 safety dime package. And I'm curious to see if that eventually is Kyler Gordon playing deep, and then they bring Josh Blackwell off the bench, or if it keeps being Jonathan Owens, because I just don't have a lot of long-term trust in Owens holding down that role and not creating some problems there in the long-term future. But we'll keep close tabs on what Dennis Allen does with the Chicago Bears defense right here on the Locked On Bears podcast. So make sure you hit that subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts, because that's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. If you're looking for a second listen today, be sure to go check out another Locked On podcast for any of your other favorite teams. Locked On Bulls, Locked On Cubs, Locked On White Sox, Locked On Blackhawks, Locked On Fighting Illini, or, any other team, any other sport, any other state. We've got you covered across the Locked On Podcast Network. Just make sure you're coming back tomorrow. Make Locked On Bears your first listen once again for another opportunity to bear down.